I'm so super excited to be coming to you guys today. This is a special edition of Anokhi Uncensored Live. As you guys know, we come live to you twice a month on alternate Mondays. Today, of course, is not Monday, it's Thursday, but it is a very special day. And I'm going to take a moment to just preface our conversation slightly. Today is World Suicide Prevention Day. I'm pleased to welcome the Executive Director of Wellkin Child and Youth Mental Wellness, Mamta Chail. At Wellkin, Mamta's focus is on elevating the organization into a lead agency for children and youth mental health. Prior to her role here, Mamta's background is made up of over 20 years in the not-for-profit sector in areas like counseling, addictions, mental health, justice, and residential support. As a social advocate and disruptor, Mamta is involved in a number of steering committees and networks to lead and inspire change at the municipal and provincial levels. Please welcome officially the wonderful Mamta Chail. Thank you so much for being a part of this, my dear.
Oh, thank you, Raj, for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just get right into it, Mamta. Before we get into actually the purpose of our conversation today, which is to tackle South Asian centric causes, awareness and preventions around the prevalence of suicide in our community, I want to give context to everyone about what led to your desire to advocate for mental awareness and wellness, both as a career and also as your life's mission.
Yeah, I don't think I can talk about what led me to where I'm at today without sharing my personal journey. And as you mentioned, Raj, this is about the South Asian community as well as mental health. And I grew up in a South Asian community. I was raised in one, and
Yes.
raised with very loving family, loving parents, loving community that wanted the best for me. Growing up, though, I didn't hear a lot about mental health. As a matter of fact, I never heard the term depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. So in my world, the way that I interpreted it, nobody in our community must suffer with that.
Right.
Which I know today is a complete lie. The odd times you would hear, reference to mental health, it would be words like boggle. And
Right.
for those Punjabis out there, you will know that means crazy.
Yeah.
Or I would hear things like, eda damag kharab hai, and which really meant that the mind must be really bad. And that was my experience being
almost
raised.
like, it's interesting, Mamta, what you're saying there, because it's almost like, okay, this person is bagal or their damag is kharab, which means that this is the way that it's going to be forever. Like there is no way to prevent it, to eliminate it or anything, because that's truly the picture of how you and I grew up, right?
Absolutely. And how stigmatizing.
Yeah.
And it really paved kind of a bit of a path, or my experience perhaps, when fast forward on to the time that I have my daughter.
Yes.
And right after I had her, in our culture, first granddaughter on my parents' side, it was meant to be just the most joyous occasion and, happily ever after.
Yes.
And that's when I was met with my first panic attack.
Okay.
And
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I didn't initially know necessarily what it meant. Was it, was I dying? Was I dying of a heart attack? But I was just overwhelmed with fear, terror. I was scared. And, but yet I could keep going on. I could keep moving on and having my understanding of mental health. What I really did was brush it under the rug. I didn't necessarily talk about it. I did the thing that I advocate for people not to do. I kind of try to hide it, hoping that it would go away, hoping that, it would just resolve itself. But that terror, the catastrophic thinking, the fear started to lead to sleepless nights, to loss of appetite. I couldn't eat, And so really symptoms of depression. I remember laying on the couch and just not wanting to get up, and having to get up to take care of my daughter felt like it was like running a 10-kilometer sprint. Not that I've ever done that, but I could imagine.
Right.
And just no energy at all. I remember one time just looking at my daughter, who was sitting in her high chair, and I just had tears because I felt guilty as a parent. I felt ashamed. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't worthy, and all the things that we associate with mental health and mental health issues.
Right.
It got to a point where I kind of knew I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live like this. This wasn't the way to live. And so I actually did seek the support of my parents. I did connect with them to let them know. And my parents had the best intentions and, are the reason for my recovery. But back then, kind of, I got met with, oh, you're stronger than that, Mamta. You can get through this. Think positively. Why don't, go for a walk? Why aren't you happy? Why are you sad? You have a beautiful daughter. You have everything going for you. And so as much as they were trying to help me, it just didn't. It continued on to the point where I thought, you know what, I need to get some external support. I need the support. I need it for myself. I need it for my daughter. I must get better. This is no way of living. And I went, and I live in London, Ontario, and there aren't a lot of South Asian therapists in London, Ontario. And so I went to one that I sought, and I remember the first day I went there, Raj, and talked about some of the challenges, talked about my family, all of the things that you talk about. I remember the therapist saying to me, it sounds like maybe your family is a trigger. So maybe you need to remove yourself from them and maybe not visit, perhaps move away from just being with them for a while.
Yeah. Did you agree with that?
I was desperate. I needed anything. I wanted anything to be that, snap of fingers for me to get better. And
yes.
However, here's where the clash of community and what a therapist is saying comes in. It didn't fit with my core values. It didn't fit with who I was. It didn't fit with who I was raised. I was raised that family is my lifeline, and now you're telling me to move away from them.
Right.
So I was discouraged, and then went the next time again. And I remember kind of again talking about my experience and sharing that, now my mom is concerned as well. She's so concerned. She's actually calling the astrologer that we talk to in India to say,
wow,
what's going on, right?
That makes sense. Absolutely.
In the Indian community, it does.
It does.
But to a therapist who may not understand our culture and our community, it didn't. I got met with questions like, does your mom have mental health? Does she have mental illness? Is she paranoid? Or do you have paranoia? Because of the fact that, talking about an astrologer, and none of that was true. But I left there going, I felt worse. I felt more shameful, maybe shameful about my culture that looks to astrologers for support. I felt more ashamed of the fact that we were so maybe close knit and shouldn't be as a family. And so there was a real clash. And I at that point, I decided, what, I need to really pave my own road to recovery.
Yeah.
If you want to share that. And I really made it my mission to help my parents help them understand what I was going through, educating them that it wasn't helpful for them just to say, stay positive, go out, go running, go exercise. And
when you're going through anxiety or depression or any of the signs and symptoms associated with this, that we don't actually technically understand what depression is and what these things actually mean. It's quite frustrating to hear someone that you love not getting just the depth of the challenge that you're dealing with on a daily basis. That, you know, I can truly understand that, having gone through, you know, bouts of depression myself throughout my life. Like, I can understand how frustrating it is that you know, the reasons they give you to be able to better yourself seem so meaningless and so peripheral to really
Mhm.
what's going on. So do you
Mhm.
want to maybe talk a little bit about that? I mean, did you feel that at all? Was that the conflict for you?
Absolutely. You know, the
Mm.
people I was the closest to, the people that, I prided myself in having a good understanding of who I was, didn't know me, and so
Mhm.
that really triggered further isolation, further unworthiness, further shame,
Right.
with respect to how I was already feeling. So there was continuous layers of that
Mhm.
were happening, and for me, and yet they did. I have to say, I'm so proud of my parents, because they did take the time then to further understand, and they are the reason for why I am here. And I will say I'm fully healed, fully recovered, because
Amen,
they
sister.
took that time. And going back to your question around the journey,
Mhm.
I really reflected on that time and thought, how is it that, I felt so alone, ashamed, unworthy, felt like
Mhm.
there was nobody else in the Southwest Asian community that has ever had a mental health issue before. And what would it have been like for me to maybe be able to sit with somebody who was able to share their experience, to be able to say,
Mhm.
you know what, I went through it and I have healed as well. And I didn't have that opportunity. So I in a sense made it my mission to make this my life's work. And I started by my career in helping people at an individual level, and seeing the results of that. It really kind of created more passion for me and more motivation to continue that work. And
Yeah.
but I knew that it wasn't enough. I knew that at a system level, at a provincial level, national level, we
Right.
needed to do so much more work. And so I decided to go and get my MBA.
Okay.
Not to be the doctor, lawyer, engineer that, the South Asian community wanted me to be, or that, very rich business person, but really to be able to have more leverage and voice in creating deep transformative change at a system level.
Mhm. I understand. So let's talk a little bit about that then, Mamta. You've had over 20 years of experience kind of within the not-for-profit sector. Can
Yeah.
you maybe talk to us a little bit about, you know, what were some of the things that you learned about mental disease versus mental health and wellness? Like, can you tackle that animal for us?
Yeah, yeah. So again, I will just put out a disclaimer that these views are my own, and they are
Yes.
derived from my personal experience. They are derived from research that I've done on my own.
Yes.
And I think it's anybody can Google the term mental health, and they'll probably get some version of it's a state of well-being. They can
Right.
Google mental disease, mental illness, and they will probably get some version around mental behavioral patterns that impair somebody's functioning. But
Right.
I think I want to really dissect what it means to me with respect to how language, terms, and diagnoses, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes may not have the impact that we're intending, and can create stigma.
Okay.
So I think one of the things, Raj, we talk about mental health, and
Yes.
why is it that we have something separate with respect to mental health versus physical health? At the end of the
Mm.
day, it is health.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that by seperating the two, we are creating a hierarchy. Physical health
Mhm.
might be more important than mental health.
And there's
We're
all kinds of support around that. Hey, Mom. That mean, you know, decades, like centuries of quote unquote traditional medicine, or whether it's even non-traditional medicine, has always been around the idea of making ourselves physically healthy. And I feel that that also kind of factors into this whole idea that we have on a cultural level, that since there isn't really, or there hasn't been since lately, anyone talking about any other form of health, then maybe there isn't any other form of disease, for want of a better word. I hate that word, but right? I mean, you know,
Right.
I do you feel that maybe it's kind of also based on some of that cultural, societal, you know, institutionalized infrastructure that we've grown up in? Like it's never really been identified until of late, when it's become kind of epidemic on levels. Like, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts, and I might get in a little bit of trouble for sharing it. When we look at medical
Disclaimer is in place.
disclaimer, yes. When we look at medical disciplines, there is no other kind of medical area where we don't look at the organ we treat.
Mm-hmm.
So, with respect to mental and mind, it's derived from the brain.
Right.
Why are we calling it mental health, mental illness, mental disease when, it is really about the brain? Imagine reframing it from mental health to brain health.
Mm-hmm. That
Um,
would change the dynamics in our headspace immediately. And we'd be like, you know what? I have a brain health issue that I need to deal with. That's a lot more
Absolutely.
palatable, you know, on an
Yeah.
individual level than talking about the word mental, you
A-
know?
Absolutely. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, then it becomes a bit more medicalized. It becomes a definition of health.
Right.
It is true health, and I'm doing air quotes here, because if we actually reframe mental health to brain health, we would be able to see heart disease similar to bipolar disorder,
Yeah.
lung disease similar to schizophrenia, because it is about the brain having health challenges
Yes.
versus mental, something abstract that we can't really even put our fingers on.
Right. Absolutely.
I do want to caution, though, in saying that some people might be online going, brain health might become medicalized. And so then, all of the things that we've thought of previously as mental health, we might have to medicalize it. But if you look at heart health, we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily always have we don't always have medicine as the route of treatment for heart health. There's
Right.
times that we have, somebody who has high blood pressure, the organ it's attached to is still the heart, but or a doctor might prescribe, exercise, better diet, de-stressing. And the same goes for
Absolutely.
brain health. There might be, you might have anxiety that is impacting the brain, but it may not necessarily have to go to a pharmacological approach, right? It
Right.
might not have to be medical intervention. Sometimes it is, sometimes it may not be. It may be brain like maybe it's about engaging the brain in different modes, right? Like treatment, perhaps
Yes.
de-stressing. So yeah, I think that's an important piece, is how do we destigmatize mental health and mental disease or mental illness? It's
Right.
maybe attaching it to the organ that we're supporting and
Right.
defining it based on that.
Such an interesting way of looking at it, because automatically, just by you saying that, I feel like so many people would be able to palate that. They'll be able to say, okay, I can see that that would be something I'm comfortable talking about, right? It
Right.
just seems to be something around the word mental, right? Because of historical associations with that word, and, you know,
Yeah.
mental institutions, and just all the horrifying things that we've heard that used to happen in the past, because they couldn't figure out medical solutions to them. So they thought that, you know, it's got to be something outside of the medical realm. Now,
Yeah.
you just finished talking about the fact that, you know, some of it is and some of it isn't, right? That's where it then becomes even more complicated, because it's almost like a causal relationship. Like something can happen that can trigger you to go through a challenge that could take you down a very deep, dark road. And, you know, we are today talking about, you know, suicide.
Yeah.
Can we touch a little bit
Of
upon
course.
some of the things that you may have learnt, experienced, seen happen in your years, around kind of the idea of signs and symptoms with suicide? Like, is there anything that you can talk about? Because there are so many causal effects that could take you down that road. But can you make sense of some of that for us?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? I think when we look at precipitating factors, or in what that means is the causes of suicide, it can have many different kind of origins. There can be definitely what we define as mental health or brain health, right? There
Yeah,
can be
yeah.
that organic piece, absolutely. But there could be many other things that will have an impact on the brain that causes things such as depression. I think what is also important to note, because it is World Suicide Prevention Day today,
Yeah.
is that there is this underlying belief or assumption that deaths by suicide or suicidal ideations and thoughts always or most often originate from a mental health disease or illness or disorder. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm using those terms in air quotes because that's the language that we know.
Yes.
There's many different reasons for suicides, and as we're talking about the South Asian culture, we also know that people aren't reporting mental health issues, so there might
Absolutely.
not necessarily be a diagnosis of one. And what we also know is that, suicidal ideations, thoughts, and even death by suicide can be caused by mental distress, not necessarily a disorder. So
Right.
I think,
What's the
yeah,
differentiating factor, distress and disorder?
well, I
Just for
think
my own
disorder.
education. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a diagnostic statistical manual and that psychiatrists would use that actually outline disorders. And there's obviously diagnostical terms related to that, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder. But then there's distress, which is you may not fit into one of those categories around a diagnosis, but you might have experienced grief or
Mhm.
high levels of stress or some situation that will
Trauma,
actually, yes,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think that's a really important note with respect to, if you are somebody who's supporting, that you don't necessarily kind of bypass the fact that there are, the symptoms, just due to the fact that there isn't a diagnosis involved.
Right. Right. That's so interesting. That's actually a really important point to note for
Mm-hmm.
everybody as well. Let's,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk a little bit about how is there a way, like, are there any kind of signs, symptoms, anything that we can potentially look out for, maybe even in ourselves, in other people, that may warrant, the possibility that there are suicidal tendencies within self
Sure.
or others? Like, is there
Yeah.
anything that people, because, people don't know, right? Because
Yeah.
it's such a taboo.
Yeah.
People don't talk about it. Nobody really knows that they have suicidal tendencies oftentimes until it becomes quite severe.
Sure, sure. So I think, if you're a family caregiver, loved one, friend, there are those common ones that are more common. Again, I want to, again, disclaimer that people present differently. It's not necessarily a
Absolutely.
textbook presentation, but some of the more common ones, Raj, are ones where, you're seeing a shift in mood and behavior that's significant. Maybe
Okay.
people are really talking about a feeling of hopelessness.
Okay.
Maybe they're even talking about suicidal ideations, thoughts, behaviors. Perhaps they used to enjoy certain activities and people, and they've withdrawn from those things. You're seeing a change in sleeping patterns, eating
Mhm.
patterns. So those are more of the common ones. I think if you know somebody, there may be other ones that they may be presenting that might not be common, but I think those are the ones that, people would say are typical
Okay.
symptoms and signs.
Okay. And these typical ones do tend to be quite prevalent. We all know somebody somewhere, whether it's ourselves, whether it's family, whether it's a coworker, that, betrays some of those signs and symptoms. So if that is the case, Mamta, from your
Yeah.
experience, of course, I want
Mm-hmm.
to preface by saying that, what can be done? Like, do we step in? Do we go to a professional? Like, what would you say would be the best way to tackle something
Yeah.
like that? Because we're not therapists, we're not people
Right.
that can
Of
do the
course.
work ourselves, but we
Right.
can. But as a community, we should be able to, see when something is happening and not ignore it, and be able to do something on some level to help somebody.
Yeah. And I think, yes, absolutely. And I think the first thing is really asking how people are doing. And there's some kind of misconception or assumptions out there that if we use the word suicide, or Raj, I ask you about suicide, that maybe that may increase your want to, die by suicide or attempt suicide. And there's no research that supports it. As a matter of fact, what we often encourage people to do is ask, and then ask very frankly about suicidal ideations, thoughts,
Right.
because people might actually feel more comforted by the fact that you're bringing it up, right?
Right.
And that you're not judging them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
There's a
that's
fine line there, though, right? Like, a lot of us aren't educated or don't have the tools or resources or the mindset to understand how to have that conversation without coming across judgy or coming with kind of a conclusive thought process around it. Like, what are your thoughts in how that could be handled just as kind of a regular person?
Yeah, and I think there's work that we have to do at an individual level, but there's work that we have to do at a system level and at community levels, right? And
So
that's
let's talk
really
about both of those. Let's talk about
yes.
both of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, at a community level, it's about reducing the stigma and our thoughts around that. We talked about reframing mental health to maybe brain health. What can we do to really reduce the stigma so that people don't feel like, the fact that we're not talking about it reinforces the idea that we shouldn't talk about suicide. Let's talk about it.
Right.
Let's openly communicate about it. I always say stigma can't survive in a society that openly talks about mental health challenges. It
So
just can't.
normalizing it, basically.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, that we need to continue to do that. We need to normalize it, because that's where we're going to create a culture that's going to seek support.
Absolutely.
And so at an individual level, it is really about listening, and listening with kindness and compassion and empathy. And trying, by empathy, I mean really putting yourself in that person's shoes without your own narrative around it, without your own bias around it, without your own judgment, because that will come through, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And perhaps it's also in how we use language and what we say when we're around people. We don't know who is suffering, who is going through brain health challenges. So when I, in a common conversation, Raj, around people go, oh, that's crazy. What is that alluding to? The weather's bipolar, right? What is that
Right.
alluding to?
Right.
So, it's the conversations that we have. Oh, that person is crazy. This is crazy. So, again, it's just being able to shift our conversations, our language, and just normalizing the fact that we all have brain health, we all have
Right.
mental health, which means we're all going to have, well, maybe not all, but the same way we would have physical health challenges, we would have brain health challenges.
Well, the way I look at it, Mamta, is, and I'm a firm believer in this, and that is, if you are not happy every moment of every day, you are dealing with some level of brain health challenge. So that's
Yeah,
how normal it actually is in reality.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so I wanted to also ask you, you've worked on a, municipal level, on a provincial level. Can we talk a little bit about that? Share
Mhm.
that with us a little bit.
So I think, a lot of the work that I do is centered around advocating for the need to really support mental health. And some of the conversations we've already had, why is it that it's separate? And,
Right.
and again, I'm not saying, I'm not upset that Cancer Care Ontario gets a lot of money, as they should, but why is mental health and addictions getting so little, right? We
Mm-hmm.
don't have enough to really support the needs and demands. So, I specifically work in children and youth right now,
Yeah.
and so a lot of my advocacy is around kind of that upstream approach, that prevention approach, that early
Right.
intervention approach. And what that really means is that, if we can support people early on with mental health challenges, the impact that's going to have on their lives as they become adults is tremendous. But to be
Absolutely.
but to be able to do that, we need to reduce the stigma, right? To
Right.
be able to do that, we need to have adequate funding. And to be able to do that, we need to make sure that we continue to say that, brain health, mental health matters as much as any other physical health symptom. So that's
Absolutely.
some of the small pieces that I do with respect to kind of advocacy provincially, and just system level kind of policy work as well.
Okay. And what kind of pushback, if anything, do you feel you get on, these levels, on the municipal and on the provincial level? Is it truly the fact that they don't get it, or they just perceive it lower on the priority? Like, what do you think it is? Is it because it's almost like a newly discovered, even though it's not, but it's a newly discovered discussion, a narrative that we're having now about kind of self-care and the wholeness of, the human experience, as opposed to just the bricks and mortar of the house we live in, like, the home that we live in, the body? Like, what do you
Yeah.
think it is?
I think it's layered for sure. It's funding, it's money, not understanding kind of the return on investment with
Right.
respect to mental health. But also, I think one of the things is that, again, we shy away from these conversations. We shy away from conversations around suicide and mental health because they're heavy, they're depressing. So as a
Mm-hmm.
society, we are not being loud about it. We're not, knocking down doors to say, what, our people are dying. People are
Right.
dying. When every 40 seconds a person is dying worldwide because of suicide, that's huge.
That's
But yet
horrific.
it is horrific.
That is a bigger
800,000.
pandemic than any kind of COVID or anything else that's, facing our world today. That is far bigger, but nobody is getting around it. The world is not shutting down to sort that problem out.
Yeah.
Don't get me started with the politics of all of that, but it's horrific what you just said. And for anyone that missed it, can you just share that again? Every 40 seconds, what are the stats there?
Yeah. So every 40 seconds, someone is dying of suicide worldwide. So that equates to 800,000 people worldwide. And in Canada
And that's
alone, because this,
preventative. We can prevent this.
yeah, we
That's the
could,
thing here, Mamta, right? If we had more resources, more funding, more on the priority list of every single government institution in the world,
more
this is
awareness.
more awareness, of course. So let me ask you a little bit, for all those people out there who are listening in, what can they do? What can we do as individuals? What can we do as sub-communities, as communities, as organizations, to help, number one, create more awareness, and number two, help with the push with, funding to go in this direction? Can you share your
Yeah.
thoughts there?
And I think it goes in line with what we've been talking about. And, I'll share that statistic again. When
Yes.
every 40 seconds somebody is dying of suicide around the world, and we're shying away from those conversations because it's heavy and depressing, what are we
Mm-hmm.
doing? We're reinforcing the idea that we shouldn't be talking about suicide. So when you're asking what can we do, let's be the generation that breaks the silence around mental health and suicide, right? And
Absolutely.
to the Southwest community, my community, how can we prevent suicide in a community that we don't even talk about?
Mm-hmm.
So, Suicide Prevention Day is today, but this is a conversation we just can't have today,
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow. We need to make it a priority for every day after.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it is going to be a hard conversation, but that's why we must have it. And we must keep talking about it in an effort to kind of elevate the urgency to get support.
Right. What can the communities, our community, the South Asian community, do to help create those conversations? Do you think that this is something that, needs to be done on, the home level, the school level, the church level, the different, groups that we're involved with? Do you feel that we should really make it a part of a mandatory discussion that needs to be had as part of, and there's obviously a larger discussion here, but as part of wellness education?
Yeah, there's many who will say, why isn't it part of our school curriculum, right?
Right.
And then for those who may not be in school anymore, how do we educate, our parents and grandparents, and absolutely creating awareness, education around brain health and what it really is versus what people think it is, right? It's
Right.
not, so we can really decrease and take away the guilt and the shame and increase the compassion and the forgiveness so that we can just eliminate stigma. That's really what we're hoping for. But the first step to that has to be education and awareness.
Absolutely.
And people have to be open to that.
If there's anyone out there, Mamta, if there's anyone out there who is like, you know what, oh my God, I feel like, I need to know more about this. Where are there any resources out there from an educational perspective that's available just to everybody that you could mention right now, just so that they have a starting point in educating themselves and removing some of the ideas around, pop cultural stigmas?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think there's many resources, and I know that your show airs across the world and across Canada. So I won't share kind of the Ontario, which is where I live, resources necessarily, but I'll share some Canadian ones. Crisis Service Canada is an excellent resource where it's 24-hour support, chat, text. It also, I believe, has a multilingual support system, so in Punjabi, Urdu, and Hindi.
That's amazing. So then, even for the older generation who really don't talk, right? Or for people that are coming from the homeland who it's not even a thing to talk about, they can speak to someone in their own language. That's amazing. I really need you to share that again. What's it called?
Crisis Service Canada. So you can Google Crisis Service Canada. And Raj, I don't know if you are able to kind of post that afterwards as well.
I will make sure that I do.
Yeah, there's also kids helplines, so that's more tailored towards kids who are the ages of 5 to 29ish, I believe. And again, if you're a bit older than that, they will redirect you. There's a lot of local resources. CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, is a great resource in if you're wanting to learn, hear stories. And locally, I don't know the resources in the UK and India, but I'm sure there are some. So what I strongly urge,
that's what Google's for, right, sweetheart?
Yes.
So wherever you are in the world, guys, that you're listening in, either with us being live here on Facebook and Instagram, or if it's one of our replays or the blog or wherever it is that you come across this conversation that I'm having here with Mamta Chail, check it out. Like, check out in your area, what are the resources available where you can educate yourself? That's number one. Number two, also check out resources where you can donate to organizations that are really pushing this forward. And number three, also, Google to find out, some of the things around what you may be going through. So what I mean by that is some people have kind of gender specific
Yes.
Needs. Others are within a certain age demographic, whether it's, the older generation and the traumas associated with, generation by generation conditioning. That's a whole topic we haven't even gone into.
Yes.
I think I need to bring you back on, lady.
That's fine. Yes, I
And
would love to do that.
oh, we're so doing this again. And and then also, when you look at university students and just the whole, culture around, expectations in the South Asian community of coming home with the academic, marks. I mean, you hear about the statistics in India regarding suicide for people in universities. It's horrific. There is so much for us to talk about.
Oh,
Mamta.
there's layers, right? There's the layers around what are some of the common kind of causes with respect to in general, but then there are some that have really specifically targeted towards the South Asian community.
Yeah.
And you spoke about a few. Some of them can be, arranged marriages. I know we don't arrange marriages the same way, but there's still some form of arrangement.
But we
there.
do. But we
Right?
do, Mamta.
Yeah.
That's the point. It depends on who you talk to.
And that's fair. That's a good point, Raj.
Yeah.
Marital problems and the stigma around divorce, so people staying in those, and how did they get out? As you talked about, academic, perfection or expectation, cultural clashes, like living between two cultures.
Yes.
There's so many pieces that we can keep kind of unlayering, and I would love to come back and talk about that.
We are so going to do this, lady. I mean, the South Asian onion of mental awareness / mental health is one that requires many, many discussions. I think that we definitely, we've kind of touched upon kind of the drop in the ocean of what that looks like even right now. And I know that a lot of people out there who are, watching, listening, going to be reading about this in all the various forms that our conversation is going to go out there across the world, are going to be in some way touched by the harrowing, statistics and, and how layered it is when you bring in ethnicity, and then you bring in gender, then you bring in socioeconomic position, then you bring in peer pressure culture. We haven't even talked about, social media and the pressures that we are currently going through about the many different ideas of what is deemed, the most appropriate way to live our lives. Nobody lives the way people show on social media, but everybody is trying to live in that fake world that is being created out there when you go to Instagram and you go to these different places. That's another layer, especially for our kids. Mamta, you and I, we are mothers. For all the mothers and the parents out there, there's a lot for us to really take in. I mean, I feel, as a takeaway from my perspective as a mom and as someone that has been in the media business for a long time and has seen many shifts happen, at least, within our community, I feel that the biggest takeaway for me, the biggest action that I feel that we need to do as parents and as community leaders is to actually start having these conversations without any judgment around it. It's to start normalizing the idea behind the health of our mind, of our heart, and our soul, because that truly is what's going to help us live the best life that we can. And we deserve to live the best life that we can.
Absolutely. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with you. We have to start having the conversations. We have to start inviting the conversations, because otherwise we keep contributing to the stigma, and ultimately stigma kills.
Yes, that's what it is here, right? That's the whole point. For any parents out there, I gotta ask you this question. For any parents out there who don't agree, who feel that, our job as parents is not so much to nurture and, help our kids figure out who they need to be, but like, kind of helping nurture that, but it's more about, we know better, we've lived more life, and it worked for us with our parents. So, our job is to actually tell them how to carve out their life, and this is the way it needs to be. there's a lot of parents in our community that put those expectations on their kids, which also creates a lot of anguish and pressure. And then there's that whole idea, especially of those of us who live, you know, in the diaspora as opposed to on the Indian subcontinent. There's this other bigger culture that we grow up in as well, you know, like the you know, the North American culture, the European culture, the, you know, whatever other culture you're dealing with. What would you say to those parents if there's someone like that who's saying, I don't agree with what you're saying? What would you say to
Right.
them?
Yeah, and I guess, you know, sometimes we ask ourselves, you know, we're hearing a lot more about mental health challenges. Has the need increased? Has the demands increased? But we also know within the South Asian community, we're not capturing data. We're not capturing what is really happening, right? The statistics, and there aren't many out there, which is unfortunate. The statistics out there isn't really telling the story. It doesn't tell us the reality. And, you know, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I know probably you and I both heard from our family and community, you know, auntie died of taking the wrong pills, uncle died of, you know, a car accident. And so I go back to, if we really knew the impact that, you know, not treating our mental health, you know, the impact of suicide, really had accurate kind of research around that, numbers around that, would parents feel the same? If they really understood the risks, would they feel the same?
Right.
I think the other piece is, and so I heard it. I heard it myself, you know, in the South Asian community in India, there is no mental health issues. So if you believe that, then you will continue on. But if you actually have the reality of what is happening, perhaps you would shift because you don't want to lose one of your children to it.
Right.
As far as today's day and age, it's a different world. You know, we have technology, as you alluded to, Raj. There's so many different pressures. And you know, you talked about this, the pressures of being an immigrant that contribute to it. So I think, you know, to those parents who might say, you know, it worked for me 40 years ago, we're living in a different world. And are you willing to take the risk?
That's just a really, really, ooh, that's a moment right there. I feel like I need to sit with that. And I hope that every parent out there will sit with that as their thought process. You know, what are you willing to have as your reality, right? Like, what are you willing to have as your reality? And I know from my perspective that my reality needs to be that if there's a way, if there's a way that we can make life easier for our children, even for our parents, Mamta, like that's also prevalent, right? The older generation, like their whole world revolved around their children. And that worked okay in, you know, India with the extended families because they remained, you know, active and relevant in kind of the infrastructure of the family. Here we live in nuclear families, right? So as soon as kids grow up, they go into a different environment, and then, you know, you're left with this empty nest syndrome, which is even more times 100 when you come from the South Asian community, especially if your roles are very traditional, you know, where the woman stays at home and looks after the kids and the man goes out and works. The man is now retired. The woman's kids are gone. She's got no one else to look after. There's almost like there's no purpose to, you know, her day. And there is so much depression amongst our seniors. So that's like a whole other discussion as well. But there's so much out there because they're no longer a part of the family per se. You know what I'm talking about here, right?
It's called attachment. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's a lot of research behind what you're saying, Raj, around, you know, not just the South Asian community in general, how we came from villages, right? That raised a child. We hear that often. And now you go to maybe not even nuclear families, maybe it's single parent families, you know, so kind of the impact around those pieces with respect to to attachment, and how do you meet those needs? And sometimes we try to meet those needs in whatever way or whatever's quickest and easiest, what we have access to may not be the healthiest either.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But you know what
Yeah,
the great thing is, Mamta, as we close off, we are having these discussions more than we ever
absolutely.
had in the history of recorded world. There are everyone from politicians to, you know, I don't know, like movie stars to the person in, your local community. Someone is addressing it, is talking about it, is allowing us in so that we can actually get a better understanding about normalizing something that is so important and should have always been important in our culture as the human race. And that is the other half of what makes us human, the other
Yes.
half of us, which is our mind, our heart, and our soul. And when that's healthy, when your body is healthy, isn't that really the way that we deserve to live as humanity, as the human world? Like, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. And I think my final thoughts is a big thank you to you, Raj. 20 years ago, would we have seen, a South Asian show talk about mental health and talk about it in its rawest form? Thank you, Raj, for the ability to normalize these experiences. And I'll say it again, by normalizing experiences, we reduce stigma. Stigma can't live in a society, in a community where we openly talk about it.
Right.
And you know what? When we reduce stigma, we're supporting our community, our people, to seek the support that they so deservingly need and should get.
Absolutely. My dear Mamta, what a pleasure it's been. I can't believe that we've actually come full circle with an hour. I feel that we've only, as I mentioned, touched upon, the precipice of what this conversation could really look like. And I would really like to invite you to come back on. Let's talk about this more. Let's maybe, we've had a generalized discussion today. Maybe what we do is we pick an area and have you come back every now and again, and we kind of really dissect area by area, because gender is a big thing, ethnicity is a big thing, socioeconomic positioning is a big thing,
Yeah.
expectation on every level. There's the work, there's the academic, there's all of these different expectations. That word expectation should just be stricken from the dictionary, because
Addiction.
it's what messes us up, sweetheart. It really
Yeah,
is.
absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe even more so in some communities. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, my darling. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Cannot wait
Thank you.
to further this discussion. Folks, this was Mamta Chail. She is an incredible and an extraordinary woman. She is doing so much work on the provincial level, on the municipal level, in her own heart space. She's a woman that I admire and I'm so proud of. And I thank you for, having space with me right now, holding space with me and our communities worldwide. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the next time we chat.
Absolutely. Thank you.